war is a game of information. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. And it's the same thing for Stellaris. But first, you need context. Everything from weapon mixing, ship variants, to even information games, and a meta deep dive covering every ship design and their relation to each other. Warning, I've already explained the basics before. 1. You need to keep in mind the proper way of mixing weapons. There are 3 main ways to do this. 1. Kinetic plus energy, the generic mix you start the game with. 2. Carrier plus missiles, from carriers, swarmers, to even torpedoes, an arcane mix that somehow works due to game mechanics. 3. Bypass, just disruptors, because everything else that can be used here suck. Now, why do we mix it like this? Because otherwise, you'll be extremely vulnerable to your weapon's weaknesses. 1. Kinetic plus energy. Kinetic weapons remove the shields, and energy weapons remove the armor. The lack of one or the other results in a possible hard counter situation, which we always want to avoid, as getting destroyed by potentially half the ships is quite the disaster. Why does this combo work? Because if equalized for size and type, kinetics all shoot faster compared to energy weapons. Why is it like this? To allow for kinetic weapons to have a shorter shadow wind-up, allowing them to shoot first to remove the shields, and the shorter reload also starts the next attack cycle much faster, removing even more shields even if the damage is distributed randomly on ships with shields or no shields. 2. Carrier plus missiles. One of the many weaknesses of both is point defense and flak. With enough of them, carriers and missiles alone get eviscerated. So much so, their damage practically goes to 0. This weakness is compounded by the unfortunate fact that they are delayed hit, meaning always landing second, and for carriers, potentially getting obliterated before dealing much damage. As when a carrier ship is destroyed, its strike crafts also disappear. But there's an interesting interaction when you combine both carriers and missiles. Point defense and flak doesn't actually have any targeting priority for their expertise, which allows us to practically disable them in battle. This strategy works best at disabling point defenses, as carriers continuously deploy strike crafts that go to the front line, resulting in an exponential increase in potential targets to shoot down, allowing missiles, or better yet, torpedoes through. This is because the targeting priority is random. Just a minuscule amount of torpedoes means they are less likely to get targeted, and just a small amount going through is enough to devastate an entire fleet, and its effects only increase with time. As the longer the battle goes, the more strike crafts are deployed, and more point defenses get frozen, winning you the battle. The interesting part is, in most cases, combining flak and point defenses as an attempt to counter this is pointless, as most if not all the designs that combo torpedoes with carriers also come with complementary missiles, which also significantly hamper the performance of the flak cannons. But the thing is, it's not as much as how strike crafts freeze enemy point defenses, as missiles number count don't exponentially increase with time and linger, but instead just increase in a wave-like fashion and land, dealing damage while destroying themselves. 3. Bypass. Now, I can sit here and talk about the variants of bypass weapons and why especially the long-range variant is terrible, but there's no point. The stats speak for itself. Look at that trash DPS. Awful. Simply awful. Disruptors are literally the only thing usable for the bypass combo. Highly effective against small ships and still effective against big ships. Their main gimmick is simply the unrivaled simplicity and combat power, in exchange for absolute vulnerability to hardening. Now, keep in mind these combos are practically absolutes you must always follow, but that doesn't mean there aren't any exceptions. I'll give an example. You're dealing with a guy with tons of advanced shield hardening while you're using disruptors. Analysis says you're cooked. Your disruptors are literally useless, as they do practically no damage. Here's the issue, you don't have enough alloys to retrofit out of them. Retrofitting can cost a fortune in both resources and time. But what if the enemy only has capital ships? You can actually instead just build some anti-shield battleships that eviscerate the enemy shields from afar, disabling all shield hardening and allowing your disruptors to hit the hull. Yeah, that's a very situational and hyper-specific example of breaking the weapon mixing rule that might actually work. If those enemy ships are instead some destroyers, you might be in for a weird culture shock, realizing that you're basically applying the basic theory of kinetic plus energy combos in a very cursed way. Kinetic plus bypass. Technically still kinetic plus energy here, but you know, it gets kinda confusing. 2. Delayed hit versus instant hit. There are weapons that land instantly when shot, and ones that don't. Think of it like this. In a battle between two fleets of instant hit weapons, the very first moment the battle starts, damage is put out with 0 travel time, destroying ships and reducing the opponent's potential damage in the next volley immediately. While in a battle between a fleet of instant hit versus delayed hit, things change. The very first moment the battle starts, damage is put out with 0 travel time by the instant hit side, destroying ships and reducing the enemy's potential damage in the next volley immediately, while the delayed hit side puts out damage with travel time, not destroying enemy ships and thus not reducing the enemy's potential damage in the next volley, which can mean the difference between life and death. I cannot understate just how important of a factor this is, especially in long-range battles between artillery computer fleets, where the travel time is significantly higher compared to normal. 3. The one thing you need to keep in mind is that you can accurately predict a battle by just knowing yourself and the enemy. Let's play a little game. A simple game of rock, paper, scissors. You don't know what the enemy will play, so you'll choose a random one. No matter what you do, you'll have a 33% chance of winning, losing, and drawing. Without information, you're practically rolling the dice, hoping for a good result. However, if you can somehow glean some information on the enemy by looking at the details through the process of elimination, you're able to cross out one of the possibilities, suddenly increasing your chances of winning and drawing to 50%, while the chance of losing goes down to a whopping 0%. Information is king. In Stellaris terms, this is just reading the enemy's possible ship designs by looking at the ship's stats and ship turrets to cross out potential designs. The 3 weapon combinations are something you have to always keep in mind here. For example, a ship with many conventional weapon turrets and egregiously low fleet power is likely to be a disruptor ship. But if the fleet power numbers are roughly average, it's probably a kinetic laser or kinetic plasma mix. Every other combination is very unlikely in this scenario. The fleet power numbers also really depend on tech level, so you just have to wing it when looking at them. Maybe even approximate the tech level by observing the amount of armor and shields a ship has. Don't forget to also look at the difference between your own tech score to the enemy's, specifically the unmodified number down here. While a ship with many missile turrets is either a swarmer or torpedo missile combo. If you're still not sure, you can simply hover over the ship's stats and look for either ship weapons range, ship engagement range, or the lack of either one. With just stats, you can pinpoint the exact ship computer the enemy is using. Ship weapons range bonus means the ship is likely using the artillery computer, probably a swarmer designed for kiting. Ship engagement range means the ship is likely using the carrier computer, can be a swarmer as well, though not ideal, while anything else is either invisible in the ship's stats or a variant of the torpedo designs. Notice how I'm being very vague about the specifics here, as the different ship models really complicates things. For example, if I had to go into more specifics, the normal missile turrets are small, while the swarmers and torpedoes are big. If there's a mix of big and small missile turrets, it's likely a torpedo. Back to the rock, paper, scissors analogy, if you're able to precisely determine what your enemy is going to play way, instead of just crossing one of the possibilities out, you can suddenly demolish them with a likelihood of 100%. Ship designs are just the same. A game of counter or be countered. A game of rock, paper, scissors, you could say. If you manage to eke out the correct answer from the trickle of information you have, then you're able to win every single time. Now, if you thought that was already complicated, then you're gonna be in for a wild ride. I haven't even explained each of the ship's gimmicks. Now, explaining literally everything is just gonna make you confused. So I opted to simplifying things down. 4. Let's see every ship's abilities and section types. Corvettes. They're fast and excel in close range. Unfortunately, very inflexible. Inflexible here meaning unable to change significantly in role and or strength by changing ship designs due to the one ship section choice that forces the ship to only use small slot weapons. So you're stuck with normal short range weapons, missiles, or disruptors. The missiles one isn't even that good after the early game, since Corvettes don't have access to the artillery computer, which makes kiting impossible. Either used as makeshift point defense or full-on swarms charging the enemy head-on. Unfortunately hard countered by literally anything using a bigot computer, or anything below large slots really, since the high tracking would completely nullify the Corvette's high evasion. Just don't forget one thing, they get hard countered by disruptors, getting eviscerated due to their pathetic hull per naval cap and just one A slot. Frigates. They're essentially very slow torpedo boats that can only carry one extra small slot. Similar to Corvettes, have the issue of being very inflexible and this time only having two ship variants, torpedoes or neutrons, and the S slot being practically useless in both cases. This is already bad enough, then you realize there's no bigot computer. I guess it technically makes sense, but it just exacerbates the issue of being terrible against destroyers and corvettes, as everything will just miss or deal practically no damage from being intercepted. The only saving grace is the fact that torpedoes have a huge damage multiplier against bigger ships, so devastating capital ships like cruisers and battleships are easy, unless they've got PD, in which you're just dead, and fielding neutrons on slow-ass frigates isn't great either. The speed is somehow slower than a cruiser, and evasion seems to not exist for this ship. All in all, not ideal, but at the very least extremely deadly when combined with cheap, low-level cloaking for defense. Destroyers. Evasive, fast ships that can adapt very well to the situation. This is where we level up in complexity. Destroyers have access to most of the combat computers and all ship slots except for G's. Missile turrets means missiles with kiting, aka ships that shoot while running, avoiding enemy close-range weapons. Normal turrets means either disruptors or the kinetic energy mix, possibly even PD to get up close and personal. Where it gets freaky is the possibility of a fourth and strange design. The artillery destroyer signified by a huge bulky turret on the front. It's generally better to pick the small back section as it allows for an extra A slot. Corvettes and frigates, for example, only have one A slot possible. This limits their possibilities for speed and hardening. In other words, more vulnerable to kiting and bypass weapons. So picking the extra slot is always good, even if it means sacrificing some possibilities. This is also true for the other ships like cruisers, battleships, and especially for destroyers, as two afterburners generally add enough evasion for the ship to become a real nuisance towards artillery ships. More specifically, big weapons and neutrons. Battleships. They're big, bulky ships with the most DPS and the highest likelihood of getting annihilated by torpedoes. Now, with that description, they sound very unappealing, but they have by far the highest possible damage per day in the entire game. Heck, they're pretty much amazing in every aspect except for their chronic weakness to torpedoes. You could think of them as the polar opposite of corvettes, except still inflexible in the opposite way. Their main gimmick is that they suck suck at close range and excel at long range. And we can see this in their amazing artillery and carriers, having the highest efficiency per naval cap and DPS alongside it, while having possibly one of the poorest setups for a close-range design ever. In essence, just make doubly sure that you either have PD destroyers escorting or the carrier middle section, as otherwise, the ship will literally evaporate out of existence when encountering torpedoes. And maybe some extra shields, just in case there's neutron launchers. Cruisers. With cruisers, we jump up in complexity with so many variations that it's safe to say that any combo is possible. Having access to all the combat computers and all the weapon types. This makes them one of the most complex ships to understand and read properly, though pretty much having the same vulnerability to torpedoes as battleships, but are somehow considered meta. Why? Is it because it's better in combat, cheaper as a whole, or heck, faster to build? No, none of that. Because it's the jack of all trades and master of none. It can be anything you want it to be. The bad part, it's complex. The good part, it's complex. You can just copy-paste designs, but if you don't know why things work, you'll probably lose battles you shouldn't have. Think of things like this. Battleships are masters of artillery and carriers, but also very vulnerable to torpedoes. Destroyers are amazing at PD and have decent close range, but rather lackluster options for long-distance fights. Corvettes literally only have evasion and speed while being inflexible and fragile, while frigates eviscerate capital ships but are slow and clunky on top of having no evasion while being just as inflexible and fragile. The worst part is, the weaknesses I listed above are impossible to fix as they come from each of the ship's sections and quirks, while cruisers on the other hand have ship sections that can do it all, while having the full range of options, supplanting the roles of every other ship type with less vulnerability to top it all off. Torpedoes? Check. Artillery? Check. Carriers? Check. A-slots? Check. You can even get PD from the carrier middle section, which is scarily good at shooting down torpedoes. Some very good players even say that a carrier middle section is the safest option there is. When combined with a torpedo front section, the ship can destroy torpedoes and small ships while absolutely dumpstering big ships in one neat package. But as the jack of all trades, master of none, the specialized strengths of other ships become a massive problem. The less efficient conversion of naval cap into a specific ship slot compared to others usually results in getting destroyed in fights of specialization. For example, against battleships, long range will likely be a death sentence. Positioning also matters a lot for cruisers, and especially so for the torp carrier. It's essentially a Schrodinger's counter. Before being observed, the ship is simultaneously every possible ship design in existence. They're the very definition of countering everything while getting countered by everything. Depending on the specific ship computer and battle start position of both sides, the position of countering or being countered can pretty much be switched around. A torp carrier with kiting computers is facing off against a swarmer carrier fleet with kiting computers. The swarmer carrier is probably gonna wipe the floor because the torp carrier design would have its torpedoes basically dead for the entire battle. Torp carrier with a kiting computer is generally good against close-range ships that like to approach the ship, allowing fighters to scramble PD while sending in torpedoes in a concentrated arc to any ships that manage to get close. But this completely flips around when facing off against kiting ships, because again, the big part of the ship's damage is basically offline for the entire battle. This actually reverses in a way when you switch the kiting computer with a more up-close and personal one, as now the ships will chase down enemies, allowing the torpedoes some chances to fire. Now, ironically, you'll have the entire opposite problem when you have the kiting computer. Your ships suddenly become significantly weaker against close-range ships, as the entire point of kiting for this design is to not get slammed by possible disruptor or kinetic energy blast before scrambling the enemy PD. In this case though, you'll only scramble a portion of the PD and most of the torpedoes will get intercepted, and knowing its nuances likely means you've likely mastered how combat works. This goes back to cruisers being the Schrodinger's counter. The counter or countering function can pretty much switch willy-nilly from seemingly small changes on the ship or situation. Funnily enough, this switch also happens again when you switch out the A slots from afterburners to hardening. You can dumpster close-range ships while being completely helpless against kiting ones. This design is complicated, seemingly random, but makes sense when you understand everything. Use it well and you'll dominate everywhere, but use it poorly and you'll probably lose half the time. Alright, now let's talk about the last elephant in the room: cruisers. More specifically, Disruptor cruisers. They're considered the meta. But why? This is because cruisers are a robust ship type while Disruptors are just so comically cheap to get for their performance. Other weapons have this massive issue of needing two tech lines to work properly. Kinetic energy combos, for example, needs both good energy and kinetic weapon techs split in two lines, while the carrier and missile line are just two tech lines on one tech type, adding massive demand in engineering research that's frankly gonna delay everything important in the engineering tree relating to your economy and even ascensions. Now, just compare this to Disruptors where you just need tier 2 lasers and roll them. So much less randomness while being a single combo weapon that only needs itself and only itself. It's also applicable to all ships except battleships and higher. In essence, it's just a quick and dirty way to mindlessly win battles. But this doesn't mean they're unstoppable. In the deep depths of people's boredom, there was a counter: hardening. Now, the thing is, both AIs and players rarely ever use them. For AIs, it's cause they suck, while for players, it's because using afterburners is not a choice, but a necessity. Going for hardening weakens your ability to fight against basically every other design, while leaving you open to being outmaneuvered by your opponent. But when you've got no choice, you'll need to know a few things about hardening first. 5. If you think it's cloudy with a chance of torpedoes, you can mix and match shield and armor hardening for some rather mixed results. Ideally, you would go all in to one hardening type to hard counter the enemy, but let's be real here, screw-ups, misreads, or just straight up fumbles happen, which can mean hard countering yourself for the enemy. It has happened to me a few times before, and it'll probably happen to you too. And yes, by the previous logic from the start of the video, you can also peek at enemy ships and determine the exact amount of armor and shield hardening they have. Pretty useful to not slam yourself against a hard counter. Alright, first up, keep in mind that armor hardening is extremely reliable but only works against Disruptors, while shield hardening is more prone to being useless but with an upside of covering all the missile and carrier weapons on top of Disruptors. Why do I say prone to being useless? Because shields are likely the first things that gets hit in a battle, and well, you need shields to be online for shield hardening to work. You can see the problem here. Second of all, there's also a correct ratio of shield hardening in relation to shield slots, while there isn't for armor hardening, as each armor module gives significantly more compared to a shield one, meaning they roughly deplete at the same rate when accounting for the damage bonuses or lack thereof from edicts, because torps can get buffed by edicts, and carriers cannot. And finally, against weapons that bypass shields, the general rule is that you want your shield and armor to deplete at the same rate, and half of the hull. For example, a ship with 3 shield hardening will want half shields and half armor. Why? Because if you have too many shields, you're just gonna see your armor get nuked pretty much instantly. Though, do still keep in mind that half of the ship's HP from this point on can still be lost and work with the hardening before the ship has a chance to be forced into MIA, so the residual shields can still be used up. Now, the more you switch out the shield hardening for the armor ones, you'll have to progressively lessen the amount of shields you have, from half to 1/3 or even 1/4 at some point. Pretty self-explanatory. Now, this is for tier 1 hardening. Tier 2 ones basically make it so you'll have to allocate basically double the shield or armor slots in the previous explanations. 3 tier 2 shield hardening pretty much warrants full shields but 1 or 2 armor. Why not go all in? Because going all in is a terribly risky idea. You always want some buffer in between anything and your hull, because once your hull gets hit, you're gonna shoot less often and risk being below 50% health, which significantly increases the risk of your ships disengaging prematurely or straight up dying. Now, after everything is all said and done, I still have to redefine what I mean by meta. Meta nowadays doesn't actually mean unstoppable, but instead reliable. But even then, each ship still have their own strengths which are indispensable in the most extreme of cases. Battleships are still king in beating high-level crisis due to their inherently more efficient long-range designs. This is because long-range designs in general are good at minimizing losses by avoiding enemy fire entirely. Obviously important when just one 25 times crisis ship firing just one weapon can completely one-shot your battleships. Even frigates, the laughingstock of the ship types, boasting the achievement of being slow and fragile, is a perfect ship to completely eviscerate Praetorian scourges from afar. Destroyers and corvettes also have their own place as unique support tools with their own super strong builds that range from overpowered to borderline gimmicks. In essence, it's complicated, but as long as you understand the big picture, it's all that matters. I tried to cram in as much as possible without it being too confusing, and if you have any more questions, you can ask it down below. Also, when writing this, it got way too long, and I haven't even gone in too much detail on the ships themselves in relation to many things in the game. I'll explain each ship type in more detail in future videos, so I recommend subscribing and maybe even hitting that like button. I'll also have to thank Alaya West and many others on Patreon for their continued support. Maybe my upload schedule will improve with time, but alas, a 30-minute video it is.